In today's episode, Julie Sweet, AAPC's Director of Advocacy and Industry Relations, interviews Kevin Indig, a leading expert on AI-driven search behavior, generative engine optimization, and the future of online discovery. Kevin is an advisor to major technology and media companies on how AI systems interpret, prioritize, and surface information online. His recent work focuses on how AI is changing the trust, usability, and user behavior across platforms. Together, Julie and Kevin get into how voters are using AI to research candidates and what happens when it becomes the first stop in the voter journey.
Hi, everyone. It's Julie Sweet with the AAPC. So glad to be with you all today. My guest today is Kevin Indig, who I'm very excited to talk to. As Kate mentioned at the top, Kevin ran SEO and organic growth at many companies for well over a decade, and he spent his career on a question that's now kind of landing on all of our desks. How do people actually search for information in an AI-powered world? And what does that mean for how they're consuming that information? And is that resulting in any kind of behavior change? So I wanted Kevin on because the commercial world really is a leading indicator here. They've been researching this for a long time, forced in it to try and understand and answer these questions for their clients. And I think Kevin's got a lot of really interesting points that he'll be able to share with us as we think about what this means for people and how they are searching for political information. So Kevin, so glad to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Julie. It's good to be here.
Okay, so very at the top, give us a sense of the scale and the speed of what we are experiencing here right now. How many people are actually using AI to find information, and how fast is that curve moving? Right? Is it a huge change from month to month, day to day? Like where might we be in November of 2026, for example?
It's a huge change. It's a very big change. Last year's data shows that about 60% of Americans have used AI to some degree. At the same time, you see companies like OpenAI registering about 1 billion of weekly users of ChatGPT. Google has just recently announced that their AI mode product has reached over 1 billion users. So this is really front and center. There is obviously a lot to say about the trust towards AI, the sentiment towards AI, but the reality is that it's everywhere. It's actually, the adoption is growing faster than the adoption of the internet by a mile. And so American and global consumers are using AI for all sorts of tasks, a lot of them still fairly simple and basic, but the use of AI for research is accelerating rapidly.
And so what are the different, when we're talking about kind of AI powered search in use, there's a couple of different entry points, right? So, and anybody who's been on Google lately knows that it doesn't look like Google of the past, or there's your ChatGPT and your Gemini, or your Claude apps. Like, what does that look like now?
You're absolutely on the money there. So the biggest touch point most people in the world have with AI is Google, right? Google has AI answers called AI overviews at the top of the search results that show that basically take a significant amount of research work and also responsibility off of the user. So Pew Research from last year, they ran a very, very robust study on over 900 US adults and over 70,000 searches. And they found that about 50% of clicks go away when people see AI answers, meaning that in about 50% of the time, probably more by now, the questions that people have for which they had to click on search results are now being answered by AI at the top of the search results. Since that study, Google has made a lot of changes to the user interface to basically put AI front and center even more. So a lot more people get their answers from AI. And interestingly, that same study also showed that a significant change in user or consumer behavior has occurred. And that change is that people don't click anymore. Right? We spoke about 50% fewer clicks on the classic search results when AI answers show up. But even the citations or sources in the AI answer is only clicked by about 1% of people. So people really take and accept these AI answers, and only in certain cases do they question the validity.
Do we think there is that true just kind of on the, are there different kinds of searches that like, because there's a fact-finding type of search, right? And there is a what time does the library open kind of search, right? Do we see a difference in kind of the type of information that people are looking for?
We do. We do. The reality is that Google has answered these very simple questions in the search results for a long time. Like when you search for something trivial, like who's the US president or who's the German chancellor, you've gotten an answer to that right away for years.
Not
Now,
always.
not always correct. And that is a threat also with AI, right? Now, what we're seeing is that Google does not shy away from risky searches at all, meaning they will show surprisingly often AI answers even for medical questions. The reason is because there's a lot of medical research that they can lean on. But the user behavior for very risky questions is slightly different. So when you search for something where your implied risk is high, you're much more likely to click on sources and the classic search results to verify and validate whether what the AI says is correct. But for many, I would say, relatively simple searches, like why are my AirPods running or falling out of my ear all the time, right? Google will give an answer that is usually good and that users will accept as the best answer. Whereas before AI, right before roughly March 2024, when Google made a big push into this area, users still had to click on classic search results and do the research themselves.
So it sounds like an interesting line of inquiry for folks interested in politics is when there are different, like, do they feel that when they're asking about a candidate or a political issue, do they consider that kind of a high risk, high like involvement, like it personally impacts them in a grave and meaningful way? Or do they think of it like, why are my AirPods falling out all the time? Right.
It's a great question. What I have not analyzed political questions directly, but from what I can infer from the body of research that I have conducted, a question like who is on the ballot, people will probably accept fairly, quickly without hesitation. But when it comes to making their choice and evaluating information, they're much more likely to fact check more. They're also much more likely to click through to YouTube and to Reddit. So one interesting aspect that I've seen in my research is that these user-generated content platforms are generally seen as a place where AI answers are fact-checked against humans. And so I would say that when people make a choice about a candidate or a vote, they will most likely they're much more likely to click through to classic search results, and they're much more likely to also go on YouTube and Reddit to see if there's information about that candidate.
Interesting. Okay. So not only is it helpful, as Mary was telling us, to make sure you've got content about your candidate or your issues up on these kind of user-generated platforms, but not just for the LLMs picking that information up and sharing it, but so the humans can use that to fact check and verify what the LLM is telling them.
Exactly. If there's a incongruence between what, say, a respected user on Reddit says, there are trust markers there as well. People are much less likely to believe in AI. But there's this interesting tension where when you look at surveys, the sentiment towards AI is pretty negative. And it's not just data centers, it's also the whole hallucination point, and that is valid. There is legit risks of hallucination. But on the other side of that rubber band is the fact that AI is hugely convenient, right? I don't have to evaluate sources myself anymore. I don't have to do that research anymore. I can just, prompt and see what the AI will give me. And the reality is that a lot of users will accept that. So I've run a user behavior study where we recruited a panel of 50 average Americans, women and men, not technical people, not marketing people, average Americans. And we recorded their behavior when purchasing expensive products, laptops, TVs, washing machines, laundry machines. And we closely observed their choice-making process. And what we found is that, especially in AI surfaces like AI Mode, like ChatGPT, like Gemini, when users receive a shortlist, so when they would ask for something like, what is the best laptop? 75% of the time, they'll go with the first result. And I'm pretty confident a similar behavior applies to political candidates as well. So a lot of the times, they will accept that answer as the best answer, which does not mean that they wouldn't then go out and do more research to kind of inform themselves more about a candidate or a product. But that initial bias is very hard to shake.
I wonder what that would mean for Coke versus Pepsi.
Yes, sure. It's the big $1 million question. I'm sure both Coke and Pepsi have different viewpoints on that.
Right. But if folks have like strong brand affinity, I wonder what that first answer looks like and how much the LLM knows about the person's own brand affinity, right? If you keep telling it, no, I prefer Coke, and it keeps telling you that you should want Pepsi, then that's probably going to impact your trust overall in using that tool, right?
It's funny you say that, because the only factor that we saw trumping rank in a shortlist is trust. What we had seen repeatedly, we had these participants speaking out loud their thoughts, etc. What we had seen repeatedly is that when users encounter a brand that they trust, they will always prefer it, no matter if it's ranked at the bottom or at the top. That trust brand is the most powerful, I would say, ingredient in this cake. And is also very hard to build and easy to lose, right? As we know from trust. But yeah, trust is, in this AI digital world, the most important ingredient.
So how does that show up? Like, if somebody trusts an answer versus doesn't trust an answer, like, what are you measuring?
A lot of it is brand trust, or maybe people trust, right? So if, for example, my neighbor, who's a banker, if he speaks about a business related topic, it's probably not as powerful as when Jeff Bezos has a point on business, right? So people understand this idea of credibility and reputation, which also translates over to products in the commercial world, right? People value Apple maybe much more highly over a no-name brand. And it also translates over to people trust, right? So I'm not trying to get like too deep into like what makes people trust other people, but that does reflect in the choice as well. And so we have the answer trust, meaning if the AI answer makes sense to users, if there's no like obvious juxtapositions or paradoxes or something that it seems off, then users will accept the answer. And then within the answer, they will pick the result that they trust the most. And if there is not a result or a brand that they know, then they will go by rank order.
Interesting. So it's almost you trust them. You trust the messenger if you trust the message.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. So I am curious, kind of going back to we talked a little bit about Google search now and how it looks different. You've got AI mode, which is not just the overview, but you can click a button and then go into conversation with the model. And are we seeing people moving from using it, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity, like moving from, let me ask you one question, or like a heavily prompted question, to more conversational style?
We are. So Google, which just had their I/O event, announced some data recently about AI mode, showing that follow-up questions have grown by, I think it was 40% year over year. So common users are getting much more used to AI and to this conversational style, which is interesting because it's very hard to track what happens throughout the conversation, right? When we're talking about how do we know whether we as a company or a person are visible and how we're being demonstrated in AI answers? The conversational part makes that very, very complex because we have to infer or guess what that conversation looks like. Because it can start with a prompt that says, who's on the ballot? Okay, tell me more about this candidate. And within that conversation, you might reveal a preference or a dispreference for a candidate, which is then known in that context of the conversation to the AI. But we don't know this from the outside, right? And so, the long story short, it is so much more important in this world to truly understand who you're quote unquote targeting with something like AI search optimization, and develop persona profiles. I'm happy to speak a bit more about what that looks like, but it is so much more important to truly understand who prompts and who searches, because their personal preferences and their profile is a huge determinator of what the answer might look like for them.
Yeah, I mean, if we've got 80% are using this, and those numbers are going to increase, and 40% increase in that conversation, it sounds like those personas are going to be incredibly important.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. It's much more personalized of an experience, right? If you think about search was 99% the same for two people living in the same country, right? Now AI answers can look vastly different. I often say that any AI experience is an n equals one, meaning it's basically unique to you. Google has a feature in AI mode that they call personal knowledge, which essentially means that they're able to pull information from Gmail, from your search behavior, from your YouTube behavior, even from your Google Photos, if you explicitly allow it, that they can all use to give you the best personalized answer. And that makes it incredibly hard, probably impossible for marketers to infer what exactly people are prompting, what exactly the conversation looks like. And so what we have to do is to create a proxy persona profile, which, by the way, AI can be incredibly helpful with. It's called a synthetic persona. We have to create these profiles, and then think about what prompts these profiles care about and what the answer might look like to them, to even get a picture of what the experience looks like for people with AI.
So, I've asked a couple of folks. I think I've asked Mary in the last conversation. Are we getting to the point where AI is going to essentially be our filter to the online worlds?
My experience says yes. And again, like 50% of Americans distrust AI in general and are very concerned. Probably over 50% are very concerned. There's a lot of concern, specifically in politics and elections, of fake news, right? So that sensitivity shows up in the polls, in surveys. It does not show up in the usage, right? When you look at how much people use AI in e-commerce, massive growth, 20% year over year. In overall usage, again, billions of people across the world are using AI all the time. And so there is this kind of disconnect about what people say and what they do, which happened many times before. For example, on the Facebook platform, right? The actions essentially show what happens, but it does not diminish the fact that that people are worried about, hallucination, about potentially getting wrong or misleading information, especially when it comes to something like video or social media. That's where the fears and the concerns are the largest. And so, as a campaign, as a candidate, you want to deeply think about how to demonstrate yourself in a personable way, in a trustworthy way. But on the technical side of things, you also want to get a feeling from firsthand user research, what topics people care about and what maybe their biggest questions are. So jumping back into the kind of B2B/consumer world, a lot of the work that I do with my clients is interviews with their prospects or customers to truly understand not just what are the topics that they care about, but also asking them directly, how do you search or prompt for these topics?
Interesting. So that 70-person study that you did, just watching that, were those intentional types of personas, if you will, that you wanted to better understand how it is that they're interacting with these tools, so as to inform you and like how your clients' customers are thinking about the brand or the service when they're using the LLM.
Yes, we intentionally selected a panel of people across a wide variety of age ranges. So from 18 all the way to 65. We aimed for a balance between genders. And we wanted specifically people that are not technical, that are not marketers, that are not, specialized in anything too much. We wanted to have an average American person to understand how they use AI. What's interesting is that we found distinct differences in age. So an older population is much less likely to adopt AI, for example, in search or outside of search, than a younger population. And we see this in the polls as well, right? I think over 80% of Gen Z are using AI almost on a daily basis, right? So the younger generations are much more bought in and also much more likely to trust what the AI says and does without fact checking, while older people are much more likely to mistrust or even just not use AI out of the bat. So we have this kind of adopter curve of people that are more likely or less likely to use AI. And I think from a voter or political context, it's probably most interesting that like a large number of young people are really bought into AI, and then older populations are less. So depending on your voter profile and who you have to persuade, that matters a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so we have variation by age in terms of adoption and how they're using it, and the kinds of queries that they're doing it, and then different types of people are using it different. And then what I think your research also shows is that the type of model or interface that they're using also results in dramatically different information being presented to them.
Correct. So for example, when we talk about a hybrid, like Google search right now is what I would call a hybrid, because you have the AI answer at the top, you have the classic search results at the bottom. That's where people do a lot more comparison. They will click a lot more, they will compare, they will fact check. It's more similar to the old behavior in the search results, right? In surfaces like AI Mode, Gemini, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, or Copilot, people are much more likely to accept the answer straight up. They might have some follow-up questions, but it's much less probing, it's much less verification, much less fact-checking when people get a single answer as opposed to a list of links. Interestingly, when it comes to news, AI use is relatively low. So Google does, at least not yet, show an AI summary for news. And also consumers broadly are not yet summarizing news with AI. They might have follow-up questions about certain news. But interestingly, and probably for the better, if I can sprinkle in a bit of my personal opinion, users are not yet getting a daily feed of news from AI, at least not the broad masses.
Okay, so we've still got, if you're still able to make some earned media, there is a bit of control as much as you're able to kind of control the earned media environment, and it feels like there's not a whole, there are so many variables. How do you even start to think about a strategy here?
The first point is consistency. So the way that LLMs work is that they're essentially looking for consensus. How many sources are saying the same thing about a product or a person? Brands and people have their own sites, they create their own content. That is one source. But what are, for example, the media saying, or affiliates, or reviewers, or testers, or users? And LLMs are trying to combine all of that into a consensus, or like basically an opinion. And so the number one point about any strategy is how consistent are we in our messaging and in the way that we portray ourselves. Two, are there any information gaps? So is there something where the AI is not sure, something the AI does not mention, or maybe where the AI does not cite a lot of sources indicating that there's not a lot of information about it, right? So again, when I think about a political candidate, there might be certain questions that people have where there's just not a lot of content. Key is to find these questions, create content, answer them, and then again, trying to persuade third parties in reflecting that same sentiment or statement or messaging, right? Media, influencers, podcasts, etc. So we're talking about consistency, we're talking about information gaps, and then third, we have to talk about where there already is a strong opinion from AI that is maybe not favorable. So an example is, if there was a kind of a famous security breach of a company that provides a password solution, passwording software, right? So the worst case that can happen. So that is something the AI will absolutely internalize and will consistently bring up when you compare that provider or that vendor against others, right? So where is the messaging weak? Right? Where do you need to work on streamlining, improving? So for that company, for example, what commitments to security can they make publicly, announce publicly, demonstrate publicly? You need to develop full campaigns, not in the political sense, but full maybe marketing campaigns to streamline and improve your weak message points, right? So tangibly, if you have a candidate in a campaign who maybe comes short in the polls on charm or trustworthiness or communication or so, you need to actively monitor whether that sentiment reflects in AI and think about, okay, what content can we create to provide a counterexample? So these would be the three pillars of any strategy for AI.
And is it given that there's consensus, which generally means a majority, right? That and a majority opinion does not always mean everyone agrees on it, but does that mean is it quality or is it quantity of information that's out there?
It's an interesting tension, Julie. So it's a bit of a mix of both. LLMs have shown repeatedly to value certain authority sources higher. A lot of times, tier one publishers, right? Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Bloomberg, these types of media outlets have a stronger voice, a louder voice in that context. But apart from those authority sources, it's really about volume, right? And to be fair, right, like it's not as easy as spamming Reddit or like spitting up a bunch of auto-generated blogs. There are certain filters in place that will weed out untrustworthy sources. But outside of authorities, it comes down to volume.
All right. So we've got a few minutes. So I think there's kind of two different ways that people are going to hear about GEO from different vendors and firms and agencies. And the first is on the measurement side, right? Like we will help you understand what the LLMs are saying about your candidate or your clients. And then on the other side is, okay, we will help you figure out what to do with that information, right? And how to make sure that you are being seen. So to be like, what do people need to know as they're being approached by either part of that equation?
Yeah.
What are the good questions to be asking?
So the measurement state of the union is shaky. What that means is AI, like we're not getting barely any first party data. So for Google search, you got data from Google about your impressions and clicks and position in search. None of that exists for AI, right? And there's certain problems involved here. So the weaknesses of measurement is that AI answers are probabilistic, which means that, and we've tested this, if you ask the same question 3 or 5 times in a row, only a small amount of the question is stable throughout all these runs, and only a small amount of citations remain. And that has to do with model confidence or model bias, which means that there are certain parts of the answer and certain citations that the model has high confidence in. There are lots of parts that it has low confidence in. And so the first thing you want to do is you want to track, if you track prompts, you want to track them in bouts. So run them 3 times, run them 5 times consecutively, and then measure what part of the answer retains to get an understanding of what part of the answer most people are likely to see. The second thing is that there is a lot of variation between the models themselves, right? So we're talking about ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, etc. They weigh different sources, they have different training data, etc. So you need to get an understanding of what model your target audience uses the most. And then it also matters whether they use reasoning or not. So we found an analysis that when a model has high reasoning activated, it will cite a lot more sources, it will be a lot more diligent. Low reasoning, it will obviously do the opposite. And so you also need to get an understanding of what your target audience may use. A lot of that has to do with discretionary income, right? If you're targeting maybe a more liquid target audience, it's much more likely they have reasoning because they pay for AI versus a much less liquid audience not paying for AI. And then I would say the last part is also about prompts and prompt selection. So you want to think about prompts specific to your target personas. You want to structure your prompt tracking by persona. That is a key ingredient, right? You want to develop a sharp profile of who you're targeting and then measure prompts in that context as opposed to just general average prompts. So these are the 3 things that I would bring up to make sure you get the most out of measurement.
So you're talking about like income levels, education levels, kind of what your work and employment might be. All of those things are going to impact how your target audiences interact with these tools.
Absolutely.
And the folks who are measuring this stuff need to be able to help you discern who those audiences are, what those behavior traits are, because otherwise it's just flat and not particularly helpful.
Exactly. That would be a red flag. Green flag would be that whoever you're talking to help you would bring that up proactively, right? Yeah. Because the message is so personalized. It's almost like if you run a campaign and you just shout into the void or into the ether, that is probably going to be much less effective than targeted messaging.
Okay, so then on the flip side, if somebody is saying, hey, we can get your presence up and we can improve the responses that your audiences may be getting out of these models, so what are the questions for them?
Yes. So the number one question is like, how are you planning to do this? And I will say, because AI is still such a black box, LMs are such a black box still, there is a lot of snakes all out there, right? A lot of the tactics are actually very similar to what we used to do in SEO, meaning the helpful, useful tactics. And so anything that looks too much like secret sauce, too much like proprietary, tactics, I would be very skeptical of. But things like, good content creation, good marketing, multimodal content creation, meaning audio and video, absolutely critical. YouTube is the second, probably by now, most cited domain in almost all the models, meaning YouTube has an outsized impact on how companies and people are portrayed in AI. So anything that relates to content creation across multi-modalities, usually green flag. Anything that seems too proprietary or too technical, most of the time, red flag.
Okay, so for somebody who's listening and, I think we oftentimes kind of might say, well, this is just a new generation of SEO. What I heard you just say is that all of the content that you are creating and putting out online is now what will be made visible through the LLM and will impact these answers, which more and more voters are going to. So this doesn't sound like this is just one person on the team's concern. It sounds like this is part and parcel, needs to be kind of in the middle of the conversation.
Absolutely. It needs to be orchestrated. And that's, in my mind, an experience the same across consumer businesses, B2B, political or media campaigns. AI compresses on two sides. On the one side, it's the fact that there needs to be orchestration and playing in unison across all of these channels, right? You cannot have separate teams working on YouTube and on your blog. It just doesn't fit the time. And then on the other hand, there's also an interesting compression of AI enabling more specialists to become generalists, right? So if you've been focused on SEO, AI maybe allows you to be a lot more effective these days on video, on maybe broad messaging, on branding, positioning, all these types of things. I'm not saying AI makes everyone a specialist, right? Expertise is still very, very important in this world. But AI certainly lowers the bar for people to operate across several functions. And so you need teams that play closely together. Usually smaller teams do a better job at that. And you need to have teams without barriers. So I think, for example, that channel-specific teams don't make a lot of sense anymore. And the companies that I see in my world performing the best, that are doing the best job at being visible in AI, they're usually the ones that have marketing or go-to-market teams that have specialists from different areas, but they're one single team as opposed to disjointed and isolated teams.
I still have so many more questions, but I do, given that we are in June of 2026 and we have an election coming up, some of folks are which are actively working in the primaries. Is this something that folks can kind of put off and say, we need to deal with, this is something we can deal with in August or September? Or is this something that is all hands now?
It's all hands in May or April. So the point is, you want to start as early as possible. As I mentioned, this point of consensus is really the deciding one. And consensus is formed slowly, also for AI. AI is usually not quick to pick new information up unless there is a specific desire to get news, or unless there really is not much or any information out there about a topic. But changing the sentiment and the way that AI portrays a topic takes a lot of time. So you want to think about this now. This is not a last-minute effort.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Kevin. This was such a wonderful treat. Really appreciate all your time. I think you publish at Substack Growth Memo. And just a lot of interesting research and conversations that you have over there. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Treat was all mine. Thank you so much.
That was our chat with Julie Sweet and Kevin Indig. Thanks for listening to The Future of Political Consulting. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and join the conversation by following us on social media at the AAPC. Thanks for listening.